Thank you very much. And I'm going to now to introduce next our speaker, Professor Oliver Scharbrodt. He is a professor of Islamic Studies at the University of Birmingham. His research covers the intellectual history of modern Islam, Sufism, 12-year Shi'ism, and Muslim minorities in Europe. He is the author of Islam and the Baha'i Faith, a comparative study of Muhammad Abdullah and Abdullah Baha Abbas, and co-authored Muslims in Ireland, past and present. He is one of the editors of Yearbook of Muslims in Europe. Currently, he leads a project funded by the European Research Council investigating the transformations of clerical authority in 12-year Shi'ism since the late 1950s. So, sorry, I'm going to find Professor Ahmed Ran.
I'm here.
Yeah, sorry, Professor Oliver. Perfect. Now I think we have you. Perfect. And Professor Oliver, thank you very much to be with us today. And he will speak about my homeland is Husayn, transnationalism and multi-locality in Shia context. Please, Professor Scharbrodt, it is the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shirin, and thank you and Minu for organizing this event. I'll hope that my presentation won't be entirely theoretical in nature, so I'll hope to illustrate how I've sort of tried to use certain theoretical concepts in terms of my own research. I will try to share my screen. So hopefully you can see my presentation. Right. So, I'm going to talk about how I've used more recent contributions to understanding diasporic religion, diasporas more generally, and the relationship between religion and space in terms of my own research that has looked at Iranian and Iraqi Shia communities and organizations in London. And I'm here particularly sort of influenced, if you like, by the work of the anthropologist Pina Webner, who has done quite a lot of work on sort of Pakistani diasporic communities in the UK and their transnational links. And she introduces the concept of complex diasporas. And what she wants to alert us to, as in my reading, is at the internal diversity and social heterogeneity of diasporic communities. Very often in public discourse, and I think also in academic discourse, diasporic communities are given a particular label and a particular identity. And I suppose that is partially due to the way how diasporic communities present themselves towards the public. They want to be seen as representatives of a particular community, towards sort of a minority community, towards state and society, as part of, if you like, the politics of recognition. So they create, if you like, a particular public image in order to sort of gain their stake, to claim their stake, within the politics of recognition, and thereby often sort of simplify or objectify complex internal discourses and identities and so on. And of course, the diversity, the complexities of these diasporas is also caused by the continuous links they entertain towards their countries of origin, the very complex transnational connections that still play a very important role in terms of the migration of people, in terms of, if you like, institutional organizational links to their countries of origin, and also perhaps what we might call more ideational links, sort of how diasporic communities engage with, are shaped by, and also influence discourses of identity, around identity, that come from their countries of origins. And in a sense, Wegener observes that almost sort of contradictorily, diasporas are both ethnic parochial, they are there to preserve a particular minority identity and gain the recognition of this particular minority identity in a sort of another majority context, but because of their movement, because of their migration, because of their transnational links, they also are cosmopolitan. So these two elements that we would usually consider to be contradictory, being parochial and cosmopolitan, for Wegener, these two features are sort of united in many diasporas. And again, she wants to alert us the internal diversity, complexities of diasporas, and the simultaneity of often contradictory discourse. And I hope to be able to illustrate this a little bit today based on my own case study. Now, I'm going to take more recent contributions on the kind of spatial entanglements of diasporic religion as a kind of a further lens by which I want to investigate my particular case study. I mean, there's a lot of, since the beginning of the discipline of comparative religion or religious studies, there has been a lot of reflection around the relationship between religion and space. These debates have been more recently revived, in particular in the study of diasporic religion. So I'm thinking here in particular of the contributions of people like Kim Knott or Thomas Tweed, you have sort of, or Manuel Vasquez, who've sort of tried to revive or reconfigure how we can conceptualize space, both physically, socially, and discursively, in order to understand, if you like, the various spatial entanglements or connections of diasporic religions. And in a sense, I feel Sean McLaughlin and John Zavos, they have brought this together in a contribution they published in 2014, writing religion into British Asian diasporas. And they want to move us away from the term diaspora because of potential misunderstandings and propose a new term when we think of diasporic religion, multi-locality. I'm not sure whether this is necessary, but I think in the way how they conceptualize the different spatial scales in which diasporic religions operate, they provide a very useful tool to understand Shia diasporas in Europe, but I think also other diasporic communities. So, and in a sense, they distinguish between 4 different spatial scales in which British Asian diasporas operate. On the one hand, and this is, I think, a familiar sight across many European cities, is the formation of particular neighborhood communities in urban areas as a result of immigration. We all have, or many of us have worked in urban context, in particular neighborhoods that have been shaped and transformed in the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years through migration, where to put it a bit crudely, where a neighborhood has been sort of taken over by a particular ethnic community or by a diversity of ethnic communities as a result of migration, from World War II. But I think also, more recently, we can see transformation of many neighborhoods in European cities as a result of the so-called migrant and the refugee and migrant crisis of 2015. So we have, if you like, the immediate local context, an urban space, an urban neighborhood whose sort of demographics, whose topography has changed as a result of migration and maybe the dominance of a particular community or a diversity of different communities. So making these communities visible and transforming very much a local context. So this is sort of the immediate sort of local urban context McLaughlin and Zavos want to make us aware of, and as a site of research and a site of study. second level is sort of the interaction with state and society. And of course, there are, working here within the British context and the sort of the British politics of multiculturalism, how, minority communities, how diasporic communities, again, represent themselves towards the state, towards society, form and frame their identities in order to be recognized as a minority community, in order to ensure the sort of the recognition, the protection of particular minority rights, religious and cultural rights, and this has become important in the British context, although perhaps we can observe similar trajectories in other European contexts, because as part of the British politics of multiculturalism, religion has been in particular identified as sort of a site of identity, the locus of identity constructions and identity representations of minority communities. So this is sort of the social, the wider political context, which is for both the second sort of spatial scale. The third level, is what we would usually call sort of transnationalism, the kind of trans and multi-local networking and activities of religious organizations. And this can obviously happen, normally we would assume, with organizations in the countries of origin of a particular diasporic religious community, with the exchange of personnel, funding and so on. But of course, it also refers to the wider connection to co-religionists, if you like, to members of the same diasporic community across the world, not just to the country of origin, but to other co-religionists and members of the same diasporic community across Europe or across the wider world. The fourth element they want to emphasize, and I think that is quite important, and it is very often overlooked or perhaps not given the necessary attention, is what they call demotic processes of personal and collective religiosities outside of institutional context, outside of, if you like, official normative discourses of what constitutes sort of orthodoxy or orthopraxy. I mean, as you can see, if you like, on particularly on the sort of the second and the third level, there's a lot of discourses that are shaped by institutional actors, by organizations, by elites within these diasporic communities that objectify, perhaps essentialize their own community and claim representation on behalf of the community as part of the politics of recognition or their transnational connections. What McLachlan and Zavos want to describe here is everyday life of these communities, and how members of diasporas challenge traditional authority structures, challenge traditional understandings of orthodoxy, develop, if you like, alternative religiosities, if you like, outside of normative discourses. And they use the term demotic, which comes obviously from the Greek word demos, of the people. So again, as both are anthropologists, they want to turn our attention to what's happening on the ground, a kind of bottom-up approach that is not solely shaped by official discourses. Now, what I'm trying to illustrate, hopefully, is how I've made these observations fruitful in the context of my own case study, Iraqi and Iranian Shia communities in London and in a particular part of London. So the site of my research has been the borough of Brent, a particular part of London. So this is London, and in the northwest of London, there's the borough of Brent, which is, as London generally, but Brent in particular, is one of the most multicultural, one of the most religiously, ethnically diverse areas in London, and also hosts, as a consequence, a very large Muslim presence. And Brent is interesting in particular if we want to understand transnational Shi'ism, because it has become, I mean, this area in particular has become one of a major global hubs of transnational Shi'ism. And I might have the opportunity to say more about this. There is a high concentration of a number of Shia community centers in this area. And for that reason, it has sort of been given different names. It's called the Shia Mile of London, because you have sort of within walking distance different community centers representing different ethnic groups, different clerical allegiances, different political groups within contemporary Shi'ism. Other refer to the Shia Triangle. Brent was known in the 1980s as a particular sort of center of leftist British politics, in particular in opposition to Margaret Thatcher. So, one of the sort of the nicknames, if you like, that has been given to Brent is the People's Republic of Brent, because of its strong leftist tendency. And because of the concentration of Shia community centers in this area, Brent is also sort of within the community referred to as the Islamic Republic of Brent, as a pun to this kind of historical political designation. So there are around 20 community centers in Brent, in this particular neighborhood, and I'll hope to sort of introduce some of these activities, some of these centers. There are, independent schools in this area run by Shia communities, so private schools. There are 2 colleges of higher education in this area that have a kind of Shia identity and Shia affiliation. There are academic outreach centers run by 2 particular organizations. Because of the concentration, demographic and institutional concentration of Shias in this area, there is an Iraqi consulate there for visa applications, for those who want to perform ziyarah to the shrines in Iraq. And the formation of Brent as a kind of the Shia Mile of London, as one of the sort of the major hubs of transnational Shi'ism, sort of goes back to the sort of late 1970s, maybe early 1980s. I mean, the main road going through Brent, if you like, is Edgware Road. And if you're a bit familiar with sort of central London or London more general, the southern end of Edgware Road, so which probably somewhere here, is sort of the Arab Street of London. So you have, if you walk, the southern end, sort of Marble Arch, Hyde Park. If you walk up Edgware Road, you have Arab shops and restaurants and so on. So that was sort of a natural destination for the first Arab immigrants, and again for Iraqi Shi'is who fled persecution under Saddam Hussein. And Edgware Road sort of stretches further up to the north to Brent. So, because again, it's a very expensive place to live in London generally, and certainly in central London. So again, for those who couldn't afford living anymore on Edgware Road in central London, sort of the Arab quarter of central London, they moved up to the north and established a very strong Iraqi and Iranian Shia presence there. Yes, and there was a certain pull factor, and many centers that were originally located somewhere else, moved from central London or from other locations to this area. So, for example, the Shirazis had initially their center, their Husayniya, on the central London part of Edgware Road, but then moved up to Brent when the Islamic Republic of Iran chose a site for their center in the mid-1990s, what has become the Islamic Center of England. They also moved close to the area. I mean, they're not necessarily, the center, the Islamic Center of England is not itself in Brent, it's a Maida Vale, but it's sort of the southern edge of Brent. So it was sort of a natural destination. If you wanted to be a player, if you like, within the Shia Mile, you had to move into this area. So this is sort of the immediate local context. And, despite all these kind of internal designations, for an outside observer, the kind of the Shi kind of identity of this place would not necessarily be visible, because it's such a diverse place with, mosques and Hindu temples and so on, that if you like, the particular significance of this place for transnational Shi'ism is not necessarily visible. McLaughlin and Zawad, they talk about the politics of recognition, and there is one organization that has become, in Britain, the public face of Shia Islam, and this is the Al-Hui Foundation. They have been, most successful in sort of representing Shia Islam to the wider public. Again, illustrating a little bit, the importance of London. After the crackdown of the Shia uprising in 1991, it was decided actually to transfer the financial assets of, Sayyid Abu Qasim al-Hui, the important teacher of Sistani, and at that time, the most widely followed marja, to London to protect it. So, in a sense, the Al-Hui Foundation in London became the kind of the actual center, the kind of administrative and financial center of Al-Hui's network. Of course, after his demise, in a sense, the Hui Foundation had to reinvent itself and, became a kind of transnational NGO. I mean, obviously, the Al-Hui Foundation has different, branches across the world. But again, they have been extremely successful in sort of being the go-to organization when it comes to journalists, the media, the public, the government wanting to know, well, what do Shiis think about this particular issue? Because they've managed to create connections with various actors, interfaith, and you can get sort of a flavor of this here, various interfaith activities and so on. And to give again a very briefly, a very interesting example of how successful they have been is sort of changes in revisions of the religious education curriculum at secondary schools in England. So the Department of Education, revised the kind of religious education curriculum for secondary schools leading up to the GCSE exam, which is sort of an exam students take after 11 years. And they opened a consultation with stakeholders and engaged with teachers and various religious organizations, churches, Buddhist, Hindu, Jewish organizations. And the Al-Hui Foundation was one of the 3 Islamic organizations which were involved in the consultation around the reform of the RE curriculum. And the success and the imprint of Al-Hui Foundation is visible because for the first time, Sunni and Shia Islam are given sort of equal footing, equal standing, equal coverage in the religious education curriculum. I mean, in the past, the focus was on Islam more generally, which we know usually by default means Sunni Islam, and Shia Islam was sort of covered as a footnote. But now both denominations gain equal coverage, fair coverage in the curriculum. And again, I think it's a particular achievement of the Al-Hui Foundation, and they've also provided teachers training because the RE teachers had to be trained in Shia Islam. They publish books and run workshops to support these activities. Now, this is the external phase of the Al-Hui Foundation, and they've been extremely successful. If you go to a majlis on a Shia holiday or day of commemoration, it is quite a traditional place. Activities are run in Arabic. It caters again for the Iraqi Shia diaspora. So it's in that sense, in terms of its internal religious activities, quite a parochial, quite a diasporic place, although it's sort of face to the public, is very much, we are supporting multiculturalism, we are the voice of Shi'ism, and so on. Another example of the kind of transnational connections, and if you like, long distance nationalism is Islam, which is a Husayniyya in Brent affiliated to Hizb ut-Dawah, the major Iraqi Shia Islamist party, which was, until 2003, if you like, the hub of diasporic politics. This was, one of the major sides of Islamist, Shia diasporic politics. It was sort of the London group that, revised the political program of Hizb ut-Dawah to sort of embrace democracy and pluralism in their vision of a post-Saddam Iraq. And, many figures that have been involved in Dar al-Islam assumed important roles in post-Saddam Iraq. I mean, here's a picture of Haider al-Abadi, who was prime minister of Iraq, who was very closely affiliated, with the center and still has connections there. But I mean, he's a particular sort of high-profile figure. But many other figures who were affiliated with Dar al-Islam have now held sort of senior positions within the Iraqi government. And even now, it is sort of, I mean, at least until 2018, until Hizb ut-Dawah was in power, it was also the go-to place if you wanted to sort of get in touch with, if you like, power holders in contemporary Iraqi politics. I mean, I noticed, for example, if you go to religious events there, the main hall, yes, there were people there, but really the business was going on in the lobby of the Husayniyya, where people try to create or maintain links with political actors in Iraq. I don't have that much time to talk about this because I'm conscious of time and I don't want to overrun. So Shireen, do let me know if I need to wrap up. Interestingly, despite the perception that we usually have of Hizb ut-Dawah as a Shia Islamist party, and the predecessor of Haider al-Abadi, Maliki, as a particular proponent of sectarian politics, the center maintains links to other Islamist actors. So they run every year an event where they invite Islamists of Shia background and Sunni background, and emphasize Islamic unity, pan-Islamic activism, and identify themes and issues that Islamists share, sort of anti-Zionism, anti-imperialism, and so on. Again, I'm happy to talk about this more later on if there are questions around this, but I'm conscious of time. Now, the final example I want to show, as part of the kind of demotic potential of Shia religious rituals is the notion of, being apolitical. Because in a sense, the two centers that I've presented, Al-Houy Foundation and Dar al-Islam, are in a sense political actors. Al-Houy very much in terms of its engagement with British society, with the British government, being sort of the go-to institutions, and of course Dar al-Islam as the official branch, if you like, the location, diasporic location of Iraqi Shia Islamism, of Hizb ut-Dawah. As a response, you have a couple of actors that present themselves as apolitical and want to dissociate themselves from, if you like, political actors or political understandings of Islamic activism. Now, obviously, we all know there's nothing more political than to say, I am apolitical. So, there is obviously interesting dynamics going on. And one example which is quite prominent and quite controversial is the Husayniyya that is associated with the Shirazi network, the followers of the controversial Marja Sayyid Muhammad al-Husayn al-Shirazi, which is now led by his younger brother Sadiq al-Shirazi, and you've got an image here of him. And obviously an interesting network, complex history, initially quite political, but the sort of the image they present now is that they are sort of a network outside of the sort of the Najafi clerical establishment. And the Shirazis are one of the very few clerical networks that articulate explicitly an antagonistic and hostile attitude towards the Islamic Republic of Iran and the kind of the political ideology and the kind of political and clerical establishment in contemporary Iran. And of course, because of the explicit hostility towards Iran and the political regime, they have become, you know, the sort of the bête noire of contemporary Shi'ism. And, you know, they emphasize, you know, a kind of a discourse of cultural authenticity. You know, we are sort of the true Shi'is, we preserve the rituals. There's a centrality of rituals, and you can see here a poster from the center taken during Fatimiyat, so during the series of rituals happening to remember the martyrdom of Fatima, and emphasizing here, if you look at the sentence in red, if you can read it, hopefully, in particular, the importance of rituals. You know, performing these rituals is key to Shia identity. It's key to sort of articulate sort of, you know, Shia sectarian identity. And there's always, I mean, it's not articulated here, but in conversations, a critique towards other Shia actors, towards those who represent the Islamic Republic or Hizb Dawah, that they play down the importance of these rituals. They don't want to antagonize Shi'is. They are too timid. You know, they are not. They don't have the courage to assert a Shia identity in opposition to Sunni Islam in particular. So there is also, if you're familiar with this network, you know, a strong anti-Sunni sectarianism part of this particular network. So again, something outside of, you know, political Islamic, the official sort of channels of the Najafi Marja'iyya or the Islamic Republic, and you know, maintaining quite a difficult relationship to these other actors. Very briefly, I want to sort of mention, you know, something outside of institutions. You obviously have the Islamic Center of England in London as sort of the official representation of the supreme leader of Iran, and they, you know, run activities in different languages for different groups. But you also have in this area a group of Iranians who organize their own private majalis, religious activities, outside of the Islamic Center. And they make it very clear that they are not opposed to Iran, or they don't do it in defiance of the presence, but they want to create, again, in their own statements, an apolitical and non-political space, a space to articulate sort of Iranian Shia religiosity outside of, you know, politicized contexts that very often shape the activities and the discourses that come from institutions that are affiliated with the Islamic Republic. I mean, of course, again, they're very eager to say, we are not opposing anyone, but we just want to focus on, if you like, the spiritual side of Shia Islam, the religious rituals in particular, outside of political discourses. So I think I should probably come to an end here. And again, I'll thank you very much for your patience, and apologies if I ran over time, and I'll look forward to your questions and comments later on.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Scharbrodt. I think it's a very interesting topic, and especially the concept of the diaspora outside of Iran. And of course, I have a couple of questions for you about the concept of the Shia diaspora, basically in UK, at the end of this panel. Thank you very much for your presentation.